Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. Today is Wednesday the 3rd of August 2022, and in tonight's programme we will be discussing the 9th of Av that falls this Saturday night, which is Saturday the 6th of August, as the night falls and then finishes on the evening of Sunday the 7th, also known as Tisha B'av in Hebrew. Now, this is a particular Hebrew date in the calendar that has a huge prophetic significance, and it marks the destruction of both the first and the second temples, when the Jewish people go into a time of 24-hour fast and mourning. But also during this time has been the darkest time for the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. And the major catastrophes have fallen upon the Jewish people on this date, including the expulsion of the Jews from England in 1290, and also the start of the final solution for the Holocaust, and also recent wars that Israel's been in. So this holds a very significant date, and we'll be unpacking its prophetic significance. And this programme today, I am joined by my good friend Robin Benson. So it's great that you can join us on Behind the Headlines tonight, Robin.
Thank you, Simon. Good to be back again.
Definitely. Robin, what are your thoughts? I know that I covered this topic last year, and the reason is because I think as Christians who have a heart and a passion and love for Israel and the Jewish people, that this period of time that we're going into the weekend, we need to keep Israel and the Jewish people in our prayers even more so, as we know that great catastrophes fall on the Jewish people during this time.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, the list of awful things that have happened to the Jewish people, Jewish communities, particularly in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, also in the Middle East, on this particular date or dates very near to it, over the centuries, is just, in some senses, it's mind-boggling to see this date continually come up again in a negative context in the life of the Jewish nation. But of course, I mean, Jewish people have actually been in a 3-week period called Between the Straits, leading up to Tisha B'av, up to the 9th of Av, where there's been a lot of self-examination, introspection, as they have remembered some of these dire events in their history. It's almost Yom Kippur is, the Day of Atonement is the holiest day. Absolutely. In the Jewish religious calendar, but the 9th of Av is the saddest day in the calendar. Although it was something obviously that was added by the rabbis post the destruction of the Second Temple and the Jewish revolt, it nevertheless has become integrated into the annual cycle of Jewish remembrance. I mean, it's not a feast day, obviously it's a fast day, but they have been in this 3-week period leading up to this, contemplating, thinking about all of these events, and it will be a day of intense fasting. I mean, they're not allowed to have weddings. Men are not allowed to shave. When they go to the synagogue services, they will sit either on cushions or even on the floor. If you wear leather shoes, you take them off. And there are several other things that are part and parcel of restrictions on the day that are never part of Jewish religious life, even on Yom Kippur, because it is such an intense remembrance of all the bad things that have happened in their history.
Absolutely. So just to remind you, we are live, we are interactive tonight, and our viewer Les is definitely, he's on the ball tonight. So he writes, the 9th of Av is the annual fast day in Judaism, on which a number of disasters in Jewish history occurred, such as the destruction of the Second Temple by the Neo-Babylonian Empire and the Second Temple by the Roman Empire in Jerusalem. According to the Mishnah, on the 9th of Av, the 12 spies returned from Canaan, and only 2 had a positive report. Also, the Romans crushed the Bar Kokhba revolt, killing approximately almost over 500,000 Jewish civilians, and the Roman commander Quinius Tilius Rufus ploughed the site of the temple in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, which is extraordinary. So you know your history, Les, very impressed. But also, I mean, if we have a look at some of these dates, I mean, this is how they date. The first, I think, 9th of Av occurred when the 12 spies went out. So we know that Joshua was told by God to send 12 spies, each representative of the 12 tribes of Israel, to go and explore the new land. And of course, the other 10 came back and said, this land is full of giants. They'll defeat us. They were full of fear, gave a very negative report, apart from Joshua and Caleb, who actually then provided a report saying, yes, we can take this land. This land is flowing with milk and honey. Yeah. And I think that is the start of this Jewish tradition, dates back from there. And then we know that disaster has followed everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, it was Moses actually that sent them out, but that's. But if you look at if you look in the books of Moses, and compare the two retellings of those events, you see that actually Moses is under great pressure from the people of Israel, because God has commanded them to go into the promised land to take it. They're at Kadesh Barnea, they're ready to enter, but for some reason they hold back. And Moses is pressurized into sending these 12 representatives from each of the spies. And I mean, I'm not a Hebrew expert in any sense, but I'm told that if you look at the Hebrew in the Exodus and Numbers telling of the story, actually God says to him, okay, do it. Get on with it. So God allows it, but it's not actually what the Lord wanted in the first place. And of course, as you pointed out, there's this negative result. Which then has the catastrophic effect that, several 100,000 Jewish men over the age of 20 in the next 40 years die because of their disobedience before they get in this circuitous route back to the plains of Moab, ready to cross the Jordan River again. Nice. So it cost the nation literally hundreds of thousands of men's lives for their disobedience.
And also we see as well, which is absolutely extraordinary, that there was a 600-year gap between the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. And we saw that destruction as described in the book of Jeremiah, as described in the book of Isaiah, by the Babylonians. And it was then 600 years to the very day, the 9th of Av, that we saw the destruction of the Second Temple. And of course then the Jewish people actually mark the build-up of the done so many programs this week, my brain's starting to go. So the Roman siege of Jerusalem, which actually falls on, according to my notes here, which is very interesting. Let me get this one. It's called, so Tisha B'av marks the day of mourning and fasting, but starts 3 weeks before, as Robin said, on the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, when the Roman siege of Jerusalem began in AD 70 and intensified during the last 9 days in the build-up to Tisha B'av, which was also the 9th of Av, when the walls of Jerusalem were breached and destroyed. And of course, this is where the tradition came in after the destruction of the Second Temple. But considering that it's absolutely remarkable that the first temple fell on the 9th of Av, and the second one did as well, in a space of 600 years to that very day. It's just absolutely extraordinary.
Well, you and I know that God is not a God of coincidences. He's a God of specifics. And so he engineered it, he in his sovereignty engineered it, that both of these major catastrophes in the religious, cultural, social life of the Jewish people happened on the same day, because it was something that they needed never to forget. And I mean, you think about the circumstances. I mean, the destruction of the first temple by Nebuchadnezzar was because of the idolatry that was pervasive in the southern kingdom of Judah. I mean, the northern kingdom had already been taken away by the Assyrians sometime earlier. And so the thing is that what happened in both of those destructions is the prophetic word given by Moses at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, where I think it's chapter 32, where he gives a list of blessings if they obey the God of Israel. But the list of punishments is twice as long as the list of blessings in Deuteronomy. And we see that judgment of God, that warning taking place in the first destruction, and then come along the second destruction. I mean, the rabbis, again, the Jewish sages say that God organized what happened with the Romans because of the hatred and the bad mouthing that had taken hold in Judaism at the time. You have the zealots who were assassinating anybody who collaborated with the Romans. So Jerusalem had become a very unsafe city. And there was all of this murder going on in the city. There were all of the factions in the different Judaisms of the day. You have the Sadducees in control of the temple, the Pharisees. Judaism was riven with division. And the Jewish sages say that out of that negative situation, God implemented judgment yet again with the destruction of the second temple.
Yeah, so according to my notes here, so the destruction of the first temple was by the Babylonians. The first temple was built, of course, by King Solomon and destroyed by the Babylonians on the 9th of Av, 421 BC. The destruction was led by Nebuchadnezzar II, who attacked and besieged Jerusalem, and it's estimated that at least 100,000 Jewish people died during this short time. Nebuchadnezzar's army plundered the temple, then set fire to it, and the building burnt for 24 hours, just after midday on the 10th of Av. Also, the city of Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonian army. Many of the high priests serving in the temple, as well as prominent figures, were also murdered by the Babylonians. Gold, silver, and many holy vessels used in the temple were taken to Babylon. They say at least 100,000 Jews were massacred, and many remaining Jews were forced into exile in Babylon, which is modern-day Iraq. And of course, this is where we get the story of Daniel. And this exile lasted 7 years and brought an end to the Babylonian rule over the Jewish people. So just a reminder, we are live, we are interactive. And the big question for tonight's program is, why do we need to step up our prayers for Israel and the Jewish people, particularly as we approach the 9th of Av on Saturday night?
Yes. Where do you want to go with this, Sam? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, of course. So I think just giving some sort of factual background knowledge to the destruction of the first temple and then the second temple. So I'm just going to read out a little bit of notes, and then we got a news report to go to this one.
Okay.
This one, the second temple was built in 349 BC by Jewish exiles from Babylon by a royal decree of Cyrus the Great from the ancient Persian Empire, and stood for more than 400 years. It was destroyed in AD 70 by the Romans, led by the man who would become Emperor Titus. His armies besieged Jerusalem, and as a result, more than 2 million Jews living in the city died from disease, starvation, or were murdered when the Roman armies entered the city. And for 3 weeks, battles between the Jews and the Romans raged. And on Tisha B'av, it culminated in the final battle, 9th of Av. The Jews lost despite putting up a strong fight. Although Titus purportedly ordered the temple not to be burnt, the soldiers set it alight that day. Then the Romans brought idols into what was left of the second temple and offered up sacrifices to their gods. The holy vessels and any gold found was stolen by the Romans. More than 1 million Jews were forced into exile in Rome, which today marks the diaspora of the Jewish people. And it's also believed that between 800,000 and 100,000 Jews were sold into slavery, and that occurred on the 9th of Av. And of course, we've also got some modern examples, but let's go to this excellent CBN news report that looks at the destruction of both the first and second temples.
About 20 feet below the surface, Israeli archaeologists have uncovered a 2,000-year-old road next to the city of David. The road leads from the Pool of Siloam below and goes up to the Temple Mount. 2,000 years ago, this likely would have been the route that Jesus took on his way up to the temple.
This is probably where Jesus acted and marched during his time.
Moran Hajbi is an archaeologist with the Israel Antiquities Authority.
We know today that this street was paved during the time of Pontius Pilate, which famous for crucifying Jesus. And now it's opening a new era in the research of Jerusalem.
The excavation points directly to the time the Romans quelled a Jewish rebellion and destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. One example is this remarkably preserved 2,000-year-old burned palm frond or branch.
When we're speaking about the destruction, this is a destruction. The palm tree was burned in the fire that the Roman ignited here. And again, when we're speaking about the last moment of Jerusalem, this tree probably saw the last moment of Jerusalem. And again, it's very symbolic because the palm tree is the symbol of Judea in that time.
They also discovered weapons of war from Jerusalem's fight for life.
This is the evidence of the battle. These ballista balls that was shot by catapults into the city, maybe within the city itself. Arrowheads that was fired both by the Romans and the Jewish rebels. And obviously we're speaking about battles and wars, and we have the weapons here that, again, telling us these stories.
Some escaped through this drainage channel. For Hajbi, the project tells a compelling story.
And the fighting was happening here in the street and in the drainage channel, which is right underneath us. People were just running away through these drainage channels. Some of them ran to Masada. Sometimes I find myself imagine people running along the street, maybe running from the Romans, maybe running to fight against the Romans, and again, and this fire in this background.
Within a few years, as the dig moves toward the Temple Mount, people can look forward to retracing the steps of Jesus from 2,000 years ago. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the City of David, Jerusalem.
And that's for some of the UN agencies that don't actually believe that there was a first and second temple. All the evidence is there. Those Arab states that refuse, or Islamic states that refuse to recognise Jewish history, we see it there in that excellent report. You only have to look at the archaeological evidence to realise that the first and second temple were destroyed by the Babylonians and by the Romans. But I mean, Robin, it's also interesting as well that this ties in so much into prophetic scriptures when Jesus talked about, because we see that really, according to Daniel chapter 9, and Daniel talks about how the Messiah had to be cut off before the destruction of the second temple in AD. Therefore, this historically could only be Yeshua as the Messiah. It was that very small period of time.
Yes, and of course we have Jesus' words to his disciples. I'm just going to quote from Matthew 24. This is not long before his crucifixion. Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. This is after Jesus had one of his confrontations with the Jewish leadership in the temple. But he, that's Jesus, answered them, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." And then they go out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus gives what's called the Olivet Discourse, looking at the prophetic events that lead up to his return. Absolutely. But it's that prophetic pronouncement that really must have, mind-boggled the disciples when he told them that this place is going to be destroyed. They're obviously very inquisitive as to know when this is going to be. You've read out the details before we had that video segment. But what maybe we don't often think about, that obviously the destruction of the temple changed the Jewish world because there was no longer a place for sacrifice. So the Jewish rabbis had to get together and had to rethink Judaism. How do we seek to worship the God of Israel? How do we seek to obey him? How do we seek to please him? Because we cannot sacrifice anymore. And of course, they instituted various different things within the liturgy and the worship of the synagogue, which then became the main center of Jewish worship post the destruction of the temple. And we're living with that reality, nearly 2,000 years later. And yet the scriptures point to us that there will be at least one, maybe not at least, maybe even two rebuilt temples, one destroyed when Yeshua returns, and then a new one built from which he will rule the world from Jerusalem. I mean, that's at least one interpretation.
Yeah, but isn't it incredible also that Jesus himself, as you discussed there in the Olivet Discourse, discussed the 9th of Av, or
Yes.
Tisha B'av, the destruction of the second temple that would
without naming the date, he nevertheless told them, you need to watch out because this is coming.
Definitely. So I've got a few more emails, so really appreciate that. Just a reminder, we are live and we are interactive. Someone is asking, is this an annual date or a jubilee, or what? Do you think mid-tribulation it could be significant? I think if you watch the rest of the programme, you realise that it is very, very significant. Firstly, it is an annual event. This happens every year around this time, give it 3 or 4 weeks. But it's not a jubilee, it's not a celebration. This is the most sombre date in the Jewish calendar. So it's a day of mourning, it's a day of fasting, it's a day of inter-reflection, both individually and also on behalf of the corporate body that is the Jewish people worldwide. And in terms of does it have mid-trib significance, I think it could well do. I think we could see that the Antichrist, after he's been in power for 3.5 years and he forces everyone to worship him and to worship the dragon, which is Satan, that could actually happen on the 9th of Av.
It could do.
It's a speculation, but looking at all these patterns throughout time and history, I think there's a strong case to suggest.
No, I totally agree with you, Simon. I totally agree.
And we've got this one. This one says, hi Simon and Robin, I love this Jewish history, that's good. I wasn't taught it until I began watching your channel in 2016. Thank you very much, and that's from N. So yes, I think it's so important that the rest of the mainstream church is missing out on these Jewish gems because they don't understand the Jewish roots of our faith. This one says, hi lads, I'm a born again follower of Jesus and I'm concerted to Israel on all the Jewish people. I think you meant concerned, I'm not sure. That's where Jesus is coming back soon. Praying for Jerusalem is very important in my life. Great to hear. I had a spiritual experience about how Jerusalem is the key to God's unfolding in these days. Apple of God's eye. I love Jesus, and that flows to Israel and the Jewish nation. What blessing is to be able to pray for Jerusalem, which is in my heart, in the love for this truth. Thank you, Jesus, for revealing these truths. And that's thanks, Kev. Well, superb email, Kev, and I think you're very much on board with us, so really appreciate that.
Yeah, but of course, it's not just limited to what happened to the Jewish people in the land of Israel itself. As you sort of hinted in the introduction, the 9th of Av has played a sad, negative part in the history of the Jewish people outside the land of Israel. As for instance, 1095, the First Crusade, was declared by Pope Urban II, and as the Crusaders marched their way through Europe on down into the Mediterranean basin area, they killed thousands of Jewish people in small communities scattered across the route that they took. So in other words, those communities learned to be afraid of the sign of the cross, which, is terrible. As you mentioned before, in 1190, we had this massacre of the Jewish population in York. Again, came about through the blood libel, which actually originated here in the UK. That whole lie against the Jewish people about the use of the blood of a child to make the matzah for Passover, that started in the UK, and one of the repercussions was this slaughter of hundreds of Jewish people, although some took their own lives because they didn't want to be killed by the Christians who were surrounding them in the tower that still stands on the outskirts of York to this day. You have the 1290 expulsion of the Jews from the UK by Edward I. I think that's Edward Longshanks of Braveheart fame, same character. But the thing is, in that situation, that there had been a lead up to that with the repression and the restriction of the Jewish community in the UK, to the point where basically the only thing that they could do in order to have a means of living was to be moneylenders, which is always cast in a negative sense, usually in most anti-Jewish literature. But the thing is, before Edward expelled them, he he destroyed he had all the records of the money that was owed to the Jewish community destroyed. So they not only were expelled from the UK, they lost all their wealth along with it. You mentioned, again, 1492, what's his name, is going off to...
Christopher Columbus?
Christopher Columbus is going off to explore, the world and find the new world. At the same time, Ferdinand and Isabella are expelling the Jewish population from Spain.
Which occurred on the 9th of Av, which is...
Yeah, again on the 9th of Av. Sometime later, they were expelled from Portugal. I'm not quite sure of the date. Excuse me. And you have the Jews in Florence, again in Tisha B'av in 1571, are forced into a ghetto. And in 1670, the Jews were forced out of Vienna, Austria. And you have the Russian pogroms between 1881 and 1884 to Jewish populations throughout the Russian Empire. Several of those happening on the 9th of Av. So it's not something that's just been limited to the land of Israel and the Middle East. It's been wherever there have been Jewish communities, there are negative things have happened to them on this date.
But it almost seems, thinking through this, Robin, it almost seems as if they have to relive the destruction of the first and second temple each year. That something catastrophic happens during this time, and of course we're heading, the 9th of Av is actually on Saturday evening, and that's why it's important that we keep up our prayers and intercession for Israel and the Jewish people, because this is a dark time. But it almost seems that throughout history, some of the key historical events of tragedy that's befallen the Jewish people have actually occurred during this time. Now, what's also very significant as well, if you think about this particular time of year, July, August, it usually is that period that the 9th of Av and the Tisha B'av actually happens, is a time when most of the world, or the Western world, slows down. This is when a lot of people are on holiday, a lot of people are they're winding down their work like we are here in the studios. This is our last live recording up Behind Headlines until the 31st of August, so a 3-week break, and the studio's been closed. And yet we see these dramatic events that occur against the Jewish people that have actually changed and altered history. But they haven't just had an impact on the Jewish people, but they've had a detrimental impact on society and nations and civilizations as well.
Well, particularly where the nations where the Christian church has been in predominance, because obviously you and I are only too well aware of the whole negative impact of the topic of replacement theology. Well, that was something that took hold in the early centuries of the Christian church, and part of the reinforcement of that theological perspective was the destruction of not so much the first temple, but certainly the second temple. Those that ploughed the furrow of replacement theology said, here's the destruction of the temple, here's the expulsion of the Jewish people by the Romans out of their native land. This proves that the God of the Bible has no longer any interest in the Jews or the land of Israel. And that's the narrative that is still bandied around to this day by those who hold to supersessionism or replacement theology or fulfillment theology, whatever the label is that has evolved on this particular theological viewpoint over the centuries.
No, absolutely. So let's give you some more dates in history, and then we'll get up to recent times. So prior to this, the Russian pogroms started in 1881 to 1884, and that started on the 9th of Av. And then on the 1st of August 1914, the 9th of Av, Germany declared war on Russia, opening the gates of fire and fury and death that became the First World War. The war affected Eastern European Jewry very badly, as many Jewish people were forced to flee their homes and communities because of the fighting. It was estimated that 1 million Jewish soldiers also served in the war. Moreover, on both sides of the war, Tsarist Russia and Germany, Jews were seen as traitors. In Tsarist Russia, Jews living near the front front lines were forced out of their homes with no notice by the army. A central part of the fighting also took place on the Eastern Front, where many Jews lived and also were forced to flee the fighting. We saw the end of World War I also brought the rise of anti-Semitism in both Germany and Russia during the 1917 revolution and beyond. And some rabbis and historians hold that the First World War had consequences following the carnage that led to the Second World War, and of course the Holocaust as well. And of course we had the genocide against the Armenian people and Christians in the Middle East, 1.5, and if it wasn't for the Armenian genocide, then most probably the Holocaust probably wouldn't have happened. Do you want to tell us the accounts also, some of the horrendous events that occurred, Robin, in the Second World War on the 9th of Av?
Yeah, because on the 2nd of August 1941, you had the start of the implementation of what can only be termed the demonic final solution. Nazi Germany and its allies' implementation of the plan to rid the world, that was Hitler's plan, to rid the whole world of the Jewish people, starting obviously with Nazi-controlled Western and Eastern Europe. And we know, Yad Vashem, other Holocaust memorial museums around the world highlight the fact that at least 6 million Jewish people, men, women and children, lost their lives during that period. I mean, that's an estimate. Some estimates are much higher than that. It could be up to 8 million. But they actually don't know because the records were destroyed. But that's what happened as a result of this anti-Jewish feeling that had seeped into Western European hearts and minds over the centuries. July 23rd, 1942, the Treblinka death camp northeast of Warsaw began its operations and continued until October 43. The Hebrew date that operations began at the death camp was Tisha B'av. And on that exact same day, the first deportations from the Warsaw Ghetto to Treblinka began. And in just 15 months, the Nazis murdered 870 Jews at Treblinka. It's one of the worst atrocities outside of what went on Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz-Birkenau. I mean, the 1.1 million people that were slaughtered at Auschwitz between 1940 and 45, it took more than a year to murder close to 1 million Jews at Treblinka while that was going on at Auschwitz at the same time. I mean, the numbers, I think it's very hard for us, all of these decades later, to really get our heads around what that meant. But it meant Jewish communities disappeared off the face of the earth across Western and Eastern Europe into these hellholes of Treblinka, Sobibor, Kelmo, and Auschwitz, these death camps set up by the Nazis and their collaborators. But prior to that, you obviously had what went on in the Ukraine, which has still never really been fully acknowledged, even down to this day. You have the Holocaust by bullets that predates these death camps. And again, that's all flowing out of this replacement theology, anti-Semitism, that had infiltrated into Western and Eastern European mindsets and cultures over the centuries.
Absolutely, but it was actually the 9th of Av that triggered all the major decisions regarding the Holocaust and the extermination of Jewish people. Just got a couple of emails and then we'll go to our special guest for the evening. This one says, "Hi guys, love the programme. Picking up parts from a supplier today. The comment was made, the future is not as it used to be. A complete non-believer, but hopefully an opportunity for a prophetic introduction." And that's from Pat in Ireland, absolutely. And there is a powerful case to be made that because of the times in which we're living in are absolutely extraordinary, gives a wonderful opportunity to tell people not only the gospel, but also to show them that history is his story and that he is shaping history and that we are seeing the fulfillment of biblical prophecy in our day. And if you want to know what's going on, read the Bible, read the book of Daniel, read the book of Revelation. So well done, Pat. This is from Ken, who writes, "Hi Simon and Robin, I'm sorry to admit I've never heard of the 9th of Av, but I'm very grateful for this very informative program. What is the significance of the number 9 and what does the word Av actually mean? I've learned so much of God's chosen people, the Jews, by watching your excellent programme, Simon. Keep it up, brother. And that's Ken in Ayrshire, Scotland. 9th of Av falls on a particular month, so it's the month.
It'll move around between July and August because the Jewish calendar is lunar based. That's why it's constantly in flux. I'm not sure if there probably is a significance in Jewish numerology to the number 9, but I'm not sure what it is. Av is the Hebrew word for father. Now the thing is that before the Babylonian exile, and in some Jewish quarters today, they don't have a name for each month of the year. It's the first month, the second month, and third month, and so on. But when the exiles returned from Babylon, they brought, somehow in that 70-year period that they were there, they adopted some Babylonian names. I mean, some of them are, to be honest with you, are pagan. Some of them are biblical. This one happens to be biblical because it's the Hebrew word for father.
Absolutely, and also it's also a Jewish month as well. So each, according to the Jewish calendar, each has a month. So it'd be like our April, or in this case, it might be our July, August. Anyway, so we've got a special guest all the way from Israel talking about the significance of 9th of Av this Saturday night, and which is also called Tisha B'av. Now joined on Behind Headlines with David Silva, the founder and director of Out of Zion Ministries from Northern Israel. David, it's great that you can join us on Behind Headlines. Can you just share with us what is the 9th of Av, or known in Hebrew as Tisha B'av, that holds so much significance and takes place this Saturday night?
Sure. Well, first of all, shalom, Simon, shalom to all the Revelation viewers. Yeah, well, the Tisha B'av, or the 9th of Av, it's the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, which we're obviously in now. And what's really relevant about that is it's probably what I would say is the saddest day in the Jewish calendar throughout the year, because it's the date that almost every major tragedy that befalls the Jewish people, it happens on this date, the 9th of Av, Tisha B'av. So it's interesting, the Jewish people are quite an interesting crowd, because even though many of them don't even believe in the Bible, they don't believe in God, it's part of our history, and most of the country really does stop and think about what the 9th of Av represents.
Absolutely. And David, can you just share what the Jewish people do to remember the destruction of the first and the second temple, that both were destroyed 600 years apart, but they happened on the same day, which, believe it or not, is the 9th of Av. So can you just explain to us what the Jewish people do in terms of mourning, fasting, and remembering the destruction of the first and second temples, and why it's so significant to the Jewish people?
Sure. Well, of course, the Jewish people are a mixed bunch. They say, well, we got 3 Jews, we got 5 opinions, but so everybody does it differently. Some people probably don't really do very much at all. And I would say the extreme, the religious Jews, they would definitely fast for the day. They would, I don't even know if they throw ashes on their clothes anymore or rip their clothes, but some of them do take it very, very seriously. For others, it's just a day where they refrain from eating. When it falls on a weekday, I think most restaurants and cafes are closed, and the television and the radio play more somber music, and the TV, of course, probably shows movies that are related to the destruction of the temple. So, across the board, it's very, very different, but particularly this year, because it's falling on Shabbat, of course, or at the end of Shabbat, I think a good deal of the country will be observing the day.
And David, can you share with us how the 9th of Av and the destruction of the first and the second temples relate to Yeshua HaMashiach and the connection between them?
Well, that's a little bit of a difficult question. Well, obviously, when Yeshua returns, he's coming back to a temple. He's going to be, sitting on the throne of David in the temple. And of course, Yeshua while he was here on the earth, he spent his, every year he went up to the temple to celebrate the feast, of course, as the Torah instructs the Jewish people to do. And he spent the last week of his life in and around the Second Temple compound. So obviously the temple and Yeshua are intricate. They're intricated in the past, and there's also a future fulfillment of Yeshua coming back to sit and rule and reign, for the millennium, and then for the eternity here in Jerusalem.
And David, we've witnessed some incredible catastrophes that have fallen upon the Jewish people when we mention the date, the 9th of Av, that falls on Saturday, the evening of Saturday, the 6th of August, later this week. We have already mentioned in this interview the destruction of the first and the second temple. But we also see that on the 9th of Av, 1190, the Jews of York were massacred. Sadly, in our country. Later on in Tisha B'av, the Jews of England were expelled in 1290. We see that in 1305, the Jews of France were imprisoned on Tisha B'av. Mm-hmm. We also see then in 1492, King Ferdinand and the Queen Isabella expelled the Jews of Spain on this tragic date. The Jews of Florence were forced into a ghetto. And in 1670, the Jews were forced out of Vienna. Austria, additionally, Germany declared war on Russia, putting the First World War into motion. We see then on Tisha B'av in 1914, what is the connection with all these kind of extraordinary, earth-changing events of history seem to connect the Jewish people, but also bring kind of destruction in their path throughout history?
You missed one out. Probably the most recent, Simon, was the bombing of the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, where I think 84 people lost their lives in that bombing. Anyhow, the relevance, it's very, very interesting. Now, I don't always subscribe to what the rabbis teach, but the rabbis say that the reason for this date is that this is the date that the 10 spies came back from looking into the promised land with a bad report. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And also, I think it's a real warning for all of us, because I'm sure that the full 12 spies, when they looked over into the promised land, they probably all saw the same thing with their physical eyes. But Joshua and Caleb, they were walking by faith and not by sight, whereas the other 10, they were walking by sight and not by faith, and they came back with that bad report. And we've been stuck with this date ever since. And the other thing that this recurring date shows us, Simon, is that God is really into, God is into dates, and God has there's a pattern, there's a program, a plan that God has, and it's really it's linked together with the stars, the moon, the new moons, the months, everything's linked together. It's like it's synchronized. And the message I'm trying to bring to the church is that if we would synchronize our lives with God's calendar and God's timing, I think we would see the kingdom working for us in much more powerful ways.
Absolutely, I can agree more. But I also want to give some other incredible and terrifying events that took place on the 9th of Av, this time during the Second World War. So we see that the final solution was implemented on August the 2nd, 1941, known as the 9th of Av. These are just kind of chilling reminders from history, aren't they, that of what evil befalls the Jewish people on this particular date, but also has a detrimental impact on the rest of the world as well, just like Jew hatred. First, the Jewish people are attacked, then we know our civilization or our nations then become attacked afterwards.
Yeah, well, it's again, it's the fact that this recurring date is there. Obviously, I think it points to the reality, the reality and the existence of God, who's behind it all. And really, I think the world needs to take note. Obviously, the mistake that the Jewish people made was disobedience to God, because it happened because of our disobedience. And so there's, as I said earlier, there's a lesson in the ninth of Av for the Jewish people, and there's a lesson in the ninth of Av for the church and for the, for those that are still unbelievers out there in the world.
And David, if we look at the dangerous geostrategic situation facing Israel today, we could possibly see one of these events trigger something awful come the weekend. And when we look at the growing escalation in diplomatic tension between Israel and Russia,
Mm-hmm.
with Russia threatening to close down the work of the Jewish Agency, preventing Russian Jewish aliyah from their territory. We also see that Iran is very, very close to a nuclear breakout. What are your thoughts on what could possibly happen after the weekend that would have a detrimental impact on Israel and the Jewish people?
Yeah, well, we prefer that nothing happens, but we
Absolutely.
are living in strategic times, and there are things that do have to happen before the return of the Lord. And one of those is, I believe, is a major outbreak of a conflict in the Middle East between Israel and most likely Iran. And as you said, we're right on the threshold of that. So that could. I don't really think it will, but that could erupt this weekend. And one of the other major situations right now is that the leader of Hezbollah, Sheikh Nasrallah, he's continually warning Israel that if we start extracting gas from the new field just out here off the coast of Haifa, it's 50 miles, 80 kilometers out to sea, that they will launch an attack against either the gas field or initiate a war against Israel. And just a few weeks ago, they actually flew, I think, 3 drones out towards the gas rig that's anchored out there, and Israeli missiles shot that down. But that's another possible threat. And there's also a situation ongoing right now in Gaza. Most of the southern border with Gaza, all of the little towns and the beaches are all shut down right now. The railway line that runs through to Ashkelon is shut down because obviously there's some kind of definite threat coming out of Hamas and the Gaza Strip against terror attacks. And again, it might be just coincidental, or it could be some kind of spiritual connection to the time zone that we're in and leading up to Tisha B'av on Saturday evening.
And David, your set behind you is fascinating. We have the model. I think it is the first temple behind you of what it would look like in Jerusalem. Now, I mean, I'm speculating here, but could we see that on the 9th of Av that the Antichrist breaks that 7-year peace treaty known as the Tribulation Period on the 9th of Av?
Well, the pattern is there, Simon, right down through history. This date is a very, very strategic date. And it may even begin the 7-year period. A war, in my understanding, there has to be a war before the Lord returns. There needs to be a major war in the Middle East. And out of that war will come the 7-year peace treaty and the Antichrist, whoever that may be. Then we've got, basically got a 7-year countdown, 3.5 years of relatively good times, and then 3.5 years of great tribulation. I wouldn't be surprised if even the beginning, the middle, and the end of all that could all be related to Tisha B'av.
Incredible. And this is a reminder, isn't it, to our viewers, David, that as Christians who God's placed a real love on our heart for Israel and the Jewish people, of course, Messianic believers like yourself as well, this is the time that we need to step up our prayers and intercession for Israel and the Jewish people, right?
Well, that's true every day and every week, but more so this weekend. So, I really would like to encourage the viewers to take this call to prayer very, very seriously. Let's pray against any breakout of war with Iran. Let's pray that Hezbollah is not foolish enough to attack the gas rigs, and let's just pray that God keeps his hand of protection over the nation and over the people over this weekend. Obviously, if God has got something in mind, even our prayers probably won't change it, but I think it is incumbent upon the body of Yeshua to be praying. And, I think the main reason why every Christian should be praying is because, hopefully we're all saying Maranatha, we're all looking forward to the return of Yeshua coming back to sit on the throne of David. And I actually believe the throne room in the new temple will be exactly where that Holy of Holies is, right behind my head there. That's the throne room. So that's where Yeshua will sit on that location. And God forbid if there was another major fulfillment of Tisha B'av and something happened to Jerusalem or something happens here in Israel, it at the very least would delay the return of Yeshua. So I think it's God is looking for the church to really step up prayer for Israel, not just this weekend, but particularly at this weekend.
Excellent. David, we want to thank you so much for joining us from Northern Israel today, and really appreciate your thoughts and your input as we mark the 9th of Av.
You're welcome. God bless you.
Thank you. God bless. And it's great. That was an interview with David Silva from Out of Zion Ministry. So if you want to keep up what's happening in Israel and the Middle East, he's a great person to follow, plus a great Bible teacher as well. Now, I've got a few more emails in the dying few minutes of the program. We have to do an update as well on some of the more recent 9ths of Avs. This is from Marion in North Wales, which is a beautiful area where my wife's from. Says, hi Simon and Robin, your research into Jewish history is much appreciated. I am born-again believer and 85 years old. In my school years, I was also never interested in history and not academic. But since reading the Bible from Genesis 1 verse 1, and learning about the roots of our Judeo-Christian faith under the leadership of Mike Fryer here in North Wales, and learning about the Reformation in the Evangelical Church, I continue to learn about Israel and love the land itself and the Jewish people. Every blessing. Yeah, Mike really does love Israel, that's for sure. This one is from the Jerusalem Post today. In an interview with the Media Line on Wednesday, Batash made it clear that the Islamic Jihad intends to retaliate for the arrest of its West Bank commander, Basham al-Saladi, late on Monday night. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad can't sit silent and watch the Israeli crimes and the spilling of Palestinian blood in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, he said. The roadblocks are in force at the moment in Israel. Security is tight, perhaps in anticipation of the Memorial Day this weekend and possibly of retaliation. That's from Susan. I think David also was very much indicating the same thing. This one says, have there been 9 or 10 as with the spies, or have there been more dates in history? I think I could write a book on this, and I think there'll be thousands of cases, if not thousands and thousands of 9th of Avs occurring throughout the world and throughout history. Do you want to lead us up to some of the more recent examples of bringing into the 90s and into the current decade where we are now? Yeah,
I mean, David made reference to the AMIA, the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, that was blown up in 1994, 86 people killed, some 300 others wounded. That too happened on Tisha B'av. 2006, you had Israel's war against Hezbollah in Lebanon. It was a 3-week military offensive, again connected with Tisha B'av. 2014, another conflict with Hamas in the Gaza Strip started on July 8th, finished on the 26th of August. Again, Tisha B'av comes into play in that situation. And even last year's disastrous USA withdrawal from Afghanistan, that we're still carrying the cost of, that too occurred in and around Tisha B'av, and so it goes on. And as David pointed out, as we've discussed together, Simon, it is clear that this is a key date that God uses in the calendar to keep certain things in the forefront of his people.
Absolutely. So we've got 2 minutes left, so we're going to have to really go very quick and really kind of sum up. So we're also seeing that Israel is involved in a diplomatic row with Russia that could escalate. Also mentioned the fact that the Iranians could be on the verge of a nuclear breakout. That could happen anytime soon, particularly in this period of 9th of Av, which would be catastrophic for Israel and the rest of the world. But also there was an interesting story that we had time to explore, a story about a mass storm of jellyfish arriving on the coast of Israel. And you might not think that's dramatic, but when they say that this eats the fish and could actually then lead to problems with food, and also problems with Israel's water system, then that poses a major problem. Robin, thank you so much for joining me on Behind the Headlines tonight. Really appreciate it. I want to thank you for watching home. This is our last programme on Behind the Headlines until Wednesday the 31st of October, but I've been working, and that's a live programme, but also to remind you as well, I've been busy recording lots of pre-recordings, so you will get a fresh content on Behind the Headlines throughout August, the same for Politics Today and the Middle East, so all fresh new programmes for you. Nothing's going to be repeated, so I want to thank you so much for watching tonight's programme as we've marked the 9th of Av, which occurs on Saturday the 6th of August. So let's keep praying for Israel and the Jewish people, particularly as we enter into this dark period of world history. So thank you for watching tonight's Behind the Headlines.